Today, we're digging into a really fascinating story from our source. It's about two medicines that, well, accidentally found themselves right in the middle of a massive global controversy. They were meant for one thing, but they ended up kicking off a debate that went worldwide. Okay, so on one side of this, you've got Fenbendazole, a dewormer you could literally pick up at any pet store. And on the other side, Ivermectin, a Nobel Prize-winning medicine that's been used by billions of people. One's a common pet medicine, the other's a celebrated human drug. So what on earth to possibly connect these two? And that's the big question, right? How did a dog dewormer and a Nobel-winning medicine somehow get tangled up in the same global firestorm? Well, according to our source, the whole thing really starts with one man's story. And that brings us to the human element at the heart of all this, the story that our source says basically lit the fuse for this entire phenomenon, the story of a man named Joe Tippins. Now, Joe Tippins wasn't a doctor or a scientist. He was just a regular guy who, after going through all the standard treatments, was told the worst news imaginable. His cancer was everywhere, and the doctors sent him home telling him to get his affairs in order. He had basically run out of options. This quote just perfectly captures where his head was at. I mean, when you're facing a terminal diagnosis, you start looking at things differently. He was willing to look way outside the box, and his whole decision really came down to that one simple, powerful question. So, that decision led to something that became known as the Joe Tippins Protocol. It was a pretty simple regimen, and at its center was Fenbendazole. Yep, the dog dewormer. And according to his own telling of the story, the results were just unbelievable. His cancer completely disappeared. Now look, this wasn't some peer-reviewed study published in a medical journal. It was one person's story, but it was an incredibly powerful one. It started spreading through these little underground internet forums, and as our source points out, it even got some cryptic shout-outs on major podcasts. Before long, it became one of the biggest whispered healing stories on the planet. But you know what happens when a whisper gets too loud, right? The backlash begins. The established system started to push back, and they pushed back hard. All of a sudden, the language completely changed. The conversation went from curiosity to just outright mockery. Ivermectin was suddenly horse paste. Fenbendazole was just dog medicine. And anyone who even talked about them was lumped into some internet conspiracy. Our source makes a really interesting point here. They argue that these labels, they weren't scientific arguments. They were basically psychological weapons, totally designed to ridicule the conversation and just shut it down before it could even get started. This whole pattern is what our source calls the pandemic playbook, with ivermectin being the perfect example. Think about it. You have a medicine that's been considered safe for decades, wins a Nobel Prize, used by billions of people around the world, and yet almost overnight it can be completely wiped from the public conversation if it seems to threaten a single officially approved narrative. So this immediate dismissal, this playbook of ridicule, it just begs a huge question. Why? Why would there be such a fierce, coordinated pushback against just exploring these things? Our source argues it all boils down to what it calls their fatal flaw. And here's the kicker. According to the source, the real problem with these medicines wasn't medical at all. It was economic. They all shared these four traits that are a huge threat to the current system. They're old, they're super cheap, they're off patent, and you can get them pretty much anywhere. And this right here is the absolute core of the argument from our source. The danger wasn't really about patient safety. It was about threatening the entire economic model of modern medicine. An everyday compound that could challenge a multi-billion-dollar industry, well, that can't be explored. It has to be buried. So you start to realize this whole story isn't just about two specific drugs. According to the source, it's really about a whole set of questions, what they call forbidden questions, that we're not really supposed to ask. Okay, so here's the first one. Both of these drugs are antiparasitics. Our source asks, is that just a coincidence? This question challenges a fundamental assumption. It suggests that maybe our internal environment, all the microscopic stuff living inside us, could be a key driver of illnesses that we usually just blame on bad genes or lifestyle choices. And that idea leads to an even bigger, more profound question. What if we're looking at something like cancer all wrong? The standard view is that it's like genetic chaos. A random cell just goes rogue. But what if, as the source suggests, it's more like a forest fire? The problem isn't the first spark, it's that the whole forest was dry and unhealthy to begin with. That view changes everything.
And yet you have all these stories of people saying they got better, and the official response was basically crickets. The source claims that people who saw improvement, people like Joe Tippins, they weren't treated like valuable data points to investigate. No, they were just dismissed as anecdotes, which is a really convenient way to ignore evidence that doesn't fit the profitable, established way of doing things.
And so that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from our source. When a potential cure or treatment becomes a threat to profit, does it stop being medicine? The answer to that question, well, it could change everything we think we know.